Hey guys, welcome back to another match review video. I'm joined by the one and only Joe Tweedie. It's really an honor to be joined by him because he's somebody that I've followed for quite some time now. So it's very cool, even after this Chelsea game, that it felt like a loss, honestly, for me, even though we did draw the game. But Joe is just so rational and just like such a good person to try to calm me down right now. So I'm super lucky that I had asked you to come on for this particular game. Joe, how you doing?
Yeah, really good. Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, thanks for having me on. And judging by the slight overreaction, I would say, on social media after this game, yeah, it's good that we probably give it an hour or so after the game to kind of go through it all. But yeah, happy to be on and looking forward to dig into this.
Yeah, slight overreaction.
Have to temper it a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely needed to just hop off, do my review video. I just posted that, and now we can get into it. So I do want to get into questions, guys. If you have any questions for Joe, especially, he's incredibly knowledgeable about tactics. So if you have anything that you want to get into, please drop us a question in the comment box, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So right now, I want to take it back to the starting 11, and I wasn't necessarily surprised with it. I was expecting perhaps Alonso to be rested. Maybe Aspilicueta gets rested because I was thinking about that Atletico game and I thought that maybe they would start those games. But what did you think when the starting 11 came out?
Yeah, I think probably my overall thoughts was I was pretty happy with the team selection. I know Southampton have been going through a pretty rough patch, but they are quite a sort of strong, robust team. Very energetic. We know that they can run for 90 minutes and press. So seeing guys like Zuma come back in, Kante, I think that for me was a pretty good indication that Tuchel had sort of paid attention to what Southampton were good at and sort of made the selection, I think, with that in mind. Obviously, we have a very big game coming up with Atletico as well. So I think potentially with some players, it was an element of trying to rest them for that game. But in terms of the overall lineup, yeah, I mean, I was pretty happy. I think it showed that he at least is thinking about different strengths and weaknesses of opponents and how that matches up with people that we have in the squad. With you, I think, yeah, Alonso potentially and Aspi maybe potentially could have been rested. So those two were arguably the people that I was looking at, particularly now Chia was fit again, to see if they could have sat or at least, had a little bit of a rest there. So apart from that, I think that the majority of the team was pretty decent overall.
Yeah, we have an interesting question. Oh, so another one popped up. We have an interesting question from Ali, and I had touched on this in my video. She asked, do you think Tammy shouldn't have started? He was training but had been taken off earlier for an injury. I was surprised to see him starting because even if he did come off against Newcastle and he was training and everything, I wouldn't have started him. I probably would have rested him and played Giroud up there. So were you happy with Tammy starting? Did you think anything of it, or would you have started somebody else in his place?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think certainly with future fixtures in mind, and I think I agree with you, the injury against Newcastle as well, returning him to the starting lineup that quickly, maybe it would have been better to see him come on as an impact. So I think, this is sort of a game that Giroud may have benefited from, or even actually, I think we saw the fact that Southampton playing incredibly high line, having Timo Werner maybe play down the middle in this game would have been a game to give him that confidence to play as a striker as well. So a little bit surprised, I would say, to see him start, particularly after the injury, because it did look like it might keep him out for 1 or 2 weeks. I think certainly during the first half he wasn't as mobile, I think, as what we normally see him, both in terms of how he was sort of closing down players and some of the runs that he normally makes. So I'm sure that there was a little bit in terms of him being limited in the role. But I did kind of feel maybe potentially this is a game that you could have had Timo start up front because of the high line and the way that Southampton play. We know that he's incredibly pacey. We know that he played well against them earlier in the season in that sort of position. So I maybe would have looked at him as somebody that could have played there. Of course, you've always got the option of playing Giroud as more of just a kind of typical reference point up front. But yeah, a little bit surprised that Tammy started. I wouldn't have been surprised to see him come on as a sub. But I think the way that he was moving, certainly, during that first half, suggested to me that he probably wasn't 100% and maybe in terms of Tuchel picking him was possibly a little bit of an error in hindsight.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking of maybe you're picking Tammy because you're saving Giroud for the Atletico game, or
Yeah.
I don't know because I tried to predict these lineups and then I kind of get them right sometimes. But with Tuchel, it's just been really difficult to know what he's going to play, kind of what's going through his mind and thinking about who's going to start in that Atletico game. And we're definitely going to get into that as well. But looking at this first half, Chelsea have 70-80% possession, but just absolutely nothing to show of it. What do you make of that first half?
Well, this is a big question. I think so. Since Tuchel's come in, I think the way that he has tried to address some of the defensive issues that we have, and I think a lot of that is probably adopting quite a few of the kind of positional play principles that Sarri had, where you keep a lot of the ball and therefore you're not kind of exposing the team to constant waves of counterattacks. He's compressed the space. He's sort of made that midfield kind of nice and compact in terms of having the two wingbacks to kind of support out wide, three guys behind them in terms of defence, Mason Mount pressing like a lunatic in front of them. But I think and probably my biggest concern has been, is that having this super compact, almost passive, very patient style of play, I think sometimes it leads to games like this where it feels like it's difficult for us to move up a level, move through the gears. So when we need to put a foot on the accelerator sometimes to create chances, to put pressure on teams, we have little bits of moments, but I think sometimes it feels a little bit like we're stuck in gear 2 or 3 and we need to be playing in gear 4 or 5 to create these chances. So the system and the way that things are being set up, and certainly the first half, I think we started pretty well. First 15 minutes was bright, but it's been like some games this season where if we don't take advantage of that early kind of burst of form, the rest of the game becomes a little bit of a drudge and sort of dreariness as well. And then obviously with Southampton scoring against the run of play with pretty much the only chance that they created all game, we've seen that one before. I think from then on it was getting into a point where it looked like it would be a performance that was a little bit laboured. Sometimes the ball was moving quickly, but we never really sort of enough dangerous occasions. And then when the chances came, when we did get into good positions, there was a lot of, I think, lacking of quality from a number of players. You could pick anyone really in that starting 11 in terms of the kind of lack of end product. People not getting their heads up, people making the wrong decisions, maybe just the execution was wrong. So you can maybe lean on that and say that we did get into some good positions, which is true. But I think when I look at it and look at the balance of the game, I didn't really feel like we were on their throats for the whole game. There was certainly an opportunity to be there, but I just think at the moment, the way that we're set up, we're a little bit passive. I said, I have no issue with being patient, no issue with trying to control the game. But to win games, and certainly the sort of game as it was today, sometimes you've got to be able to step on that accelerator, and I didn't see that certainly in the first half.
Yeah, I felt like something that we had seen previously under Lampard was just that Sai was passing, that we just knew we're passing between center backs because we don't want to lose possession and we're not really moving up the pitch. I don't necessarily see that as much under Tuchel, but I do feel like sometimes the players are just a little bit scared to go for a riskier pass and pass it up the pitch, and they just go there. There was a moment, I think it was, I don't remember, it was on the right hand side. I don't remember the players. I'm really bad for remembering exactly who did what, but there was a really great opportunity. I think that it was Timo maybe passed it completely back, or maybe it was Reese or somebody, and it just instead of passing it forward, it went back. So do you think that there's did you see that in this game, and do you think that there's maybe some instructions to try to play a more secure pass than to go forward? And how do you think that we fix that? Because it's something that I've worried about in recent games, is where are these goals going to come from? Because we've been winning a lot of penalties, and that's how we've been getting goals recently. But we've been scoring from open play. So what do you think about all of that?
Yeah, I think some really good points there, and I think certainly the point about the sort of whole risk reward thing is something that I've probably been worried about for maybe 2, maybe even 3 seasons really, in terms of how we play. I think at some point, you can give players as many instructions as you want, but I think a little bit falls down into kind of the individual profile of some of the players that we have. You look at other teams, I'm looking at City, and maybe they're the benchmarks, and maybe this is an unfair comparison, but you have guys sort of who play deeper in their teams that will punch the ball through the lines and play through midfield, and actually they'll take a lot of responsibility to want to play that aggressive pass. I think sometimes at Chelsea, looking at the players that we have, it's either, I don't think it's a complete lack of ability to play some of these passes, but you can see that a lot of them are very comfortable taking a safe option. They're very comfortable and almost quite willing to take the safer option. And then sometimes it really is about execution. I think one of the things I think you might have been looking at was a chance where Mason could have played Reece but slightly played it behind him. Some of that passing detail, so playing it in front of them, playing it into space, playing it to the right foot, some of these sort of really small things that can massively impact the game. I think at times we're a little bit bad in that capacity. But yeah, I do. I think the risk thing is probably the biggest takeaway here, is that I just feel certainly the setup at the moment, and this probably also goes to Lampard, it goes to Sarri, and probably back to Conte's season in terms of the structure. Just feel that we have had over the past couple of years players who are a lot more comfortable not really being the guy who's going to take the onus on the game. And if kind of now that I'm talking through it, if you think it's always been Eden Hazard has been the aggressor in the team for 7 years he was at Chelsea. He's the guy who's going to make something happen. Not saying that now he's gone, it's never going to happen again. But I think so many players that have played with him were comfortable giving him the ball and just saying, okay, that's my job done. Now that they have to be the decision maker, the decisive player, make the decisive pass, want to be the guy who's going to be the difference maker. I don't see that as much in the team at the moment. I think you've got players who can do it. I don't think it's always going to be about a coaching point as well, but sometimes it has to be about players wanting to be the difference maker. I think sometimes when you look at the squad now and maybe squads we've had in the past, I don't see that many players in the squad who really want to be the guy who's going to make the difference, to take the game by the scruff of the neck, to play the pass, to make the dribble, to be the guy who's going to be aggressive. And it's a little bit passive, a little bit safe. And as I said, there's nothing wrong with trying to keep possession and retain the ball, but to win games in the Premier League at times, you have to, as you mentioned, you have to take the risk. You have to be the guy who is willing to go through the gears and actually try something. And I don't see that all the time with this team. I think sometimes that's a little bit why we're not as good at creating chances as others. It's because I think it's a little bit too passive at times. But yeah, the point about the risk is key. I think that's probably the big takeaway from this game, and probably from games we've seen this season and maybe the past couple of seasons as well.
Yeah, that's a really, really great point. It's something that I touched on in my video as well, that I just don't feel that we really have somebody who's a difference maker and somebody to bring on that can just completely flip the game on its head, like an Eden Hazard. And I thought that Ziyech was going to be that person for us, but he just hasn't been really fitting in this Tuchel system. He's been struggling a little bit. And we got this comment that I kind of want to tie in with this. It says, we need someone like Fabregas. No one creates chances like him. We're lacking that creativity very much at Chelsea. I did think that Ziyech was going to bring that creativity. So can you speak on why you think that Ziyech isn't thriving right now? Is it the system? Is it the league? Do you think that he's going to be able to get back to that level that we've seen him at?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a very good question there. I think at the moment, and there's a guy on Twitter called Grant James who made a very good point earlier, saying that at the moment, if you look at the squad, you have like a good 5-6 players who are very comfortable in like a back three system, and then you've got a couple of players who are very good sort of playing 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1. And then kind of the good players from both systems, like you want all the good players on the pitch, but you've got good players in the back three, good players in the back four. And when they try and play in the same system, it doesn't really work out. I think the way that I look at Ziyech this season, I think for me, he's a guy that is more of a 4-3-3, kind of 4-2-3-1 guy. And this sort of inside forward position that Mason Mount and Timo Werner are playing, these split strikers. I'm not sure if he has I don't want to say like the work rate, because he worked incredibly hard at Ajax. And I think at certain points earlier in the season, his work rate was great, but just that sort of mobility that both of them have. So I think the way that the team is set up at the moment isn't really a system that's going to get the best out of him. I think if you're going to commit to him as a player, I think probably his best performance was the Burnley game before Kai Havertz got COVID. That sort of setup where he was sort of starting on the right-hand side, but he was drifting in central areas. He was drifting out to the left-hand side, almost a little bit of a free roll at times. I think that's necessarily how you get the best out of him. I still think that he can make an impact. He's probably still one of the best passers of the ball in the squad, and he does have that vision that a lot, when we're talking about people that can make a difference, he has the ability to play a difference-making pass. I just think at the moment, this sort of very structured approach that Tuchel has, and again, people who are looking at this as some sort of Lampard pro-com, and it's not really. It's just that I think the super structured system doesn't allow Ziyech to kind of float around into these spaces and make the best of his skill set, which is getting on the ball and playing those passes. If he has to be chasing and being someone who's going to counter press and effectively kind of play in this sort of right half space on the right hand side, I think you miss so much of what makes him a good player. So I do think that he potentially still can come good. I think he's had injuries. Adapting to the Premier League is never easy. From whatever league you come to, it's so much more physical, so much quicker than any league you're used to. I think there are times where he thinks he has time with the ball, and then somebody comes in and launches him. And you're like, okay, this isn't how it is in the Premier League. So I think there's a little bit of an adaptation still. But I think certainly if we want to get the best out of him, and maybe if we want to look at being a little bit more aggressive in terms of our attacking approach, shifting to a 4-3-3 and playing him maybe from the right-hand side, gives him a degree of freedom and ability to influence the game and actually play some of these passes that I think people were expecting him to play.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it's something that I wanted to ask you about. But before we move, I want to ask you about a switch of formation. But before we get to that, we got an interesting question or comment rather from Ali. She said, speaking on the difference maker, she said, I feel like Pulisic can do that, but his confidence is destroyed right now, and he's being played out of position. So, do you think that? Going along, do you think that Pulisic is one of these players that just suits better a 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1, and that there's not really much of a spot for him in the current 3 at the back system? Do you think switching it would get the best out of him? And do you think that Pulisic can be one of those players that does make the difference for the team?
Yeah, I think this is a tricky one, because I think when Pulisic is completely fully fit and sharp, I think he's one of the best players in the squad. We saw a very brief period of him in this kind of post-lockdown pandemic period, whatever it was, that sort of 10-game stretch that he had, where he was kind of not just sort of one of the best players at Chelsea, but he was sort of probably one of the best players in the Premier League at that point. I think the problem that he has had is that, I don't really want to compare him to Arjen Robben at the moment, but it's a very similar time in terms of his time at Chelsea. There's so many kind of injuries, muscular injuries, quads, groins, calves, etc. There are things that are going wrong. I think that there's something probably fundamentally biomechanically that he needs to maybe take a bit of time out and figure out first of all. Because my one concern with him in terms of his confidence, and I think if you think back to the Barnsley game, the first 5 minutes or so, he'd made a run to the corner and pulled up. And I felt that he'd pulled his hamstring at that time. I was like, okay, he's definitely pulled up here. But he carried on playing throughout the entire game. And you have to think from a mental perspective, whether he's sort of fighting with his own body at times, trying to push through some of these injuries. And I think the way that he plays, the way that he's incredibly explosive, his first touch, the fact that he wants to drive and dribble all the time, you have to be near perfect in terms of physical condition to do that. And certainly from a mental standpoint, if you're continuing to get these muscle injuries, your willingness, even if it's a subconscious thing with Pulisic, to drive and drive and drive every time he touches the ball, I don't think it's there. So I do think that he can play in the current system in the 3-4-3. I think that he could certainly do the role that Timo Werner is doing. My personal preference is to see him play wide in a 4-3-3. I think he is somebody that you want to try and get one-on-one with players as much as possible, let him dribble, let him drive at people, and try to get back to that form where he was looking to be like a kind of a wide forward, like certainly someone who could score goals, 10, 15 goals a season. That for me is the profile player that I would really like him to become. But at the moment, I think my number one concern with him isn't so much where he fits in the team. It's that he needs to get himself physically fit, because I think, again, we don't want to see a player, certainly if somebody who can be as good as he potentially can be continually sort of hindered every 2-3 games. He's got a slight injury, a pull, etc. And there will come a point where his mentality of wanting to play through it will start to seriously hurt him. I think, as I said, I think the Barnsley game, I'm almost 100% positive he injured himself in the first 5 minutes and he played through it. And then now he's out, he's out for 2-3 games again. And one of my least favorite stats, and I keep telling people this, and it's not one that I like saying, but he's already missed more games for Chelsea than Eden Hazard did in 7 years. And Hazard was kicked completely off the pitch for almost every game. I think Hazard missed about 20 games to Chelsea. I think Pulisic is approaching 30 in 1.5 seasons. So compared to Hazard's 7 years here. So, he's the durability aspect is a little bit concerning, but we need to get him in a position where he feels confident and comfortable in his body again, because he's a great player. People who don't necessarily think that he can contribute are probably a little bit misguided there, but he has to be fully fit. Because if he's not, I think we're going to see more of the Barnsley performances where he's maybe tentative, doesn't want to go full out because he's worried of seriously injuring himself, versus what we saw, as you say, like going back to that Liverpool game in that post-lockdown period where he almost single-handedly beat them. So, there's two sides to him. I want to see that side more often. I think hopefully Tuchel resting him, giving him that space to come back, hopefully leaves him in a position where he can contribute sort of towards the end of the season. But he needs to, both from a mental perspective, I think, and physical perspective, stop trying to rush himself back as well. Because, he's only going to continue doing this sort of Arjen Robben breakdown of coming back, trying to get into form, getting injured, coming back, trying to get into form, get injured, etc. We need to sort of make sure that he can get fully fit first.
Yeah, that's so brilliantly said. Honestly, I could not have said it better myself. That was incredible, and you're 100% spot on. I think that Pulisic probably is like so keen, and I don't know if it's like I thought about this recently. Like, could maybe be like a little bit of an added pressure of wearing the 10 shirt as well. I
Possibly,
don't,
yeah.
like like the pressure to get back and just be like, oh, I want to play, I need to play. I think that he just has such a strong mentality and he wants to be playing football, as does everybody else, but he has a really special mentality, I think. And I feel bad that he keeps getting injured, but like you said, it's just better for him to take a rest. I'm glad that they identified that he had like a little bit of tightness in his calf, so it's like, okay, we're just going to be preventative about it. It's not an injury yet, but we want to make sure and not rush him back, like you said, and just get him back to full fitness. And we've seen this a lot of times, that players can come back from being injured and they're fit, but they're not really fit. We saw it with Callum with the Achilles injury, and he's come out and said that it still plays up on his mind, that he lost so much muscle and he's trying to get the explosiveness back, and you don't want to pull anything else. So I think that that's definitely playing a major role in it, and hopefully he can just be rested for a couple of games, come back and start building up that momentum again. Because like you said, when he's on it, he's on it. He's my favorite player. I adore him. A lot of people think it's because we're both American. That's not it. I just think he's an incredible player. And then as an added bonus, he's also American, which is super cool because we don't see many people in the Premier League. But we have another question directed towards you, Joe. It says, what's your thought on Tuchel rating Alonso over Chilwell? He says due to height. I don't know if it's necessarily just due to height. I do think it's because of that left wing back role. But he says, Alonso doesn't offer anything other than an occasional attacking threat. I thought this was pretty interesting because I don't think that Alonso had a good game today. And he's just like one of those players that I thought it was the end of the road for him, and he just seems to keep coming back somehow. I don't understand.
Like a cockroach, he'll never die. He just never dies ever.
Yeah. Sorry, my dad was calling me. I have like my FaceTime hooked up on here, but it's not open. Okay, sorry. So, what do you make of those comments on Alonso?
Yeah, I mean, I think the aerial thing was interesting because I know Tuchel kind of said it due to his aerial ability, but Chilwell, at least statistically, and I kind of sort of remember him being this as well, was certainly one of the best like defensive headers of a ball. I think not just at Chelsea, but he was in the Premier League, certainly at Leicester. I think his stats might have dropped a little bit this season, but at Leicester he was by far one of the best fullbacks in the air. So I'm a little bit kind of curious as to sort of that reasoning. I do think part of it was, I think Chilwell was kind of quite exhausted sort of midpoint of the season. Like he had a very good start, and then he kind of had this sort of dip where he was playing pretty regularly and sort of continuing to play, even though I think he was quite tired. I think in terms of the back three shape, you can make an argument that I think Lonzo just has the experience of playing there potentially. And when you are trying to kind of maybe coming like Tuchel and just sort of get some results and get a little bit of chemistry together again, having guys that know the role and have played there, had some success there, maybe that makes sense from that perspective to play him in that position. I think today, actually, though, I mean, I put a little bit of a joking tweet out that this was going to be a game where, Alonso either scores like a 60-yard screamer or he just continues to play as he has been, because, there have been some games, even under Tuchel, I didn't think he played pretty well. I can't remember if it was Sheffield United or whatever, but he scored a ridiculous goal a few weeks ago, the chest and the volley. So he either does stuff like that or it's sort of quite an average performance. And I was getting some quite funny WhatsApps during the game. People were like, I could beat Alonso in a foot race and I've got jeans on and, like stuff like that. So I was like, okay, he's obviously not playing particularly well today. I feel a little bit sorry for Chilwell. I do think that he has needed a little bit of an extended rest. I do see him as being more of a traditional left back in a four, in a back four. So I'm not sure necessarily if a little bit like Reece, where I think Reece played pretty well today, but I think he's a much better right back than he is as a wing back, for example. I think the same applies to Chilwell there. So I think if we eventually do shift to a back four, I can see Chilwell starting over Alonso, certainly, because I just think he's a better fullback. But at the moment, I think certainly the way that Alonso's been playing, maybe the kind of experience he has in the role, that probably has lent itself to being played. And he, to Tuchel's point, he is tall. Like he is a tall guy. Obviously in terms of set pieces, that probably does help us a little bit. especially considering that we don't particularly have the biggest team in front of sort of the back five. You know, the 5'5" and under club in midfield that we normally play don't really necessarily help on set pieces as much. So I can see where he's coming from that respect. But I do think today, after the performance he's put in today, it'd be interesting to see if we play this shape going forward, if Alonso starts the next game. You know, because I think this is kind of a, you know, it wasn't absolutely an atrocious performance, but it wasn't one that you're necessarily going to be saying, yeah, I'm definitely starting the next game. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us really nicely to something else that I wanted to ask you about. So under Tuchel, I feel like we've seen these players like Alonso, like Rudiger, Jorginho, that found themselves really out of favor under Lampard, and they've kind of gotten like a second breath of life. But we're kind of seeing the same problems. It's a different manager, but we're still like, I feel like we either defend well, but we can't attack, or we attack well, but we're just left completely open. So do you see Tuchel changing it up in the future? Do you see him sticking with the same guys that he's had? Or do you think maybe some different players that we haven't been seeing so much, like a Ziyech, like maybe a Billy Gilmore, a Ben Chilwell, maybe a Reece James, he hasn't been playing that much. Do you think that we're going to see those players more going forward, or that he'll more or less stick with the same guys?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think we're kind of a little bit, I would say, at a crossroads as a club in terms of the kind of direction forward, because, you know, if you look at probably, you know, going back to Sarri and Lampard, and certainly what we've seen under Tuchel so far, the group that we have at the moment either can look very solid, very compact, very structured, but we don't really then seem to be able to do much when we attack, or under Lampard, where it was like complete opposite, where it's not chaos, but it's like, you know, we're going to try and score 6 goals if they score 5. Everyone's moving around. There's not really that much structure. And I don't think, you know, certainly even if you're looking at experienced managers, so Sarri and Tuchel for me haven't really been able to, okay, Tuchel's not had as long as Sarri and Lampard and all that sort of stuff, but trying to find a happy medium between wanting to be aggressive and play on the front foot while trying to keep it relatively solid at the back. And I think certainly when you look at the players that we have, and you mentioned a lot of people that have come back in the team, you know, I think you look at Rudiger, you look at Christensen, and you probably look at Aspi now as guys who probably only can play in a back three in terms of their effectiveness. I think Azpilicueta was kind of quite rightfully displaced in the back four by Reece James. I don't think he would have had any problems with that at all. You know, same with sort of Marcus Alonso. And I do think as well, when you have the kind of Jorginho and the cover pivot, that when you set up a game and you have a very, very good structure around them, that they can look, you know, pretty decent on the ball, and they move things and they keep things ticking over. The question is when you have games like today, and probably going into next season and even the rest of this season, there will be games where Chelsea need, I've kind of used the word before, to really put the foot on the accelerator in a game. And that, to me, in terms of the way that we're set up, very, very structured, very patient, I don't think it's always conducive to kind of creating the kind of chances and putting teams under pressure that would necessarily lead us to scoring 2-3 goals or whatever it's going to be. You know, you look at the way that City and even Liverpool played last season. You know, you can be structured, you can have, you know, play possession football, you can do all this sort of stuff that maybe we want to do under Tuchel, but there has to be a little bit more dynamism in terms of maybe, you know, changing some players up in those positions. I think Kante's in certainly the first half. I think his energy in the middle of the pitch, it was quite noticeable that the game was being played a lot quicker. Not always with the most amount of quality. I think, again, we've said a lot of the final balls and passes, not just from Kante, but from everyone else, not always the best. So it's going to be, I think, quite tricky to see in terms of shape, in terms of structure going forward, what Tuchel picks, because I think he's quite lucky that I think today's game will give him a lot of information in terms of what this team can do, what it can't do, how we need to sort of potentially change things in the future. But as I kind of sort of mentioned, the balance between wanting to maybe be a bit more aggressive, you know, we used the word risk earlier, wanted to be a bit more risky in possession, be the guy who takes more risks, take a few more you know, passes, dribbles, whatever it's going to be. The balance between that and wanting to have a very set structure that protects the middle of the pitch. And again, this isn't just a Cov and Jorginho thing. You know, we've had very, very open midfields probably since Conte's, you know, second season. And I know a lot of the teams have changed, but it seems to be like a cultural thing at Chelsea that we're not very good at really sort of keeping that area of the pitch pretty solid. You could say that there's still a bit of a kind of Nemanja Matic hole in that midfield, that sort of profile of player who will sit there and be the six and sort of defend. So Tuchel's kind of way of playing around that is, you know, very structured, 3 defenders. You know, we're actually attacking with 1 less player at the moment than we were under Lampard and certainly under Sarri. Be a little bit more restrictive in terms of how we attack and things like that. So, yeah, I think today probably, I'm not going to say it's going to be like a watershed game where everything radically changes going forward, but I think Tuchel is an incredibly intelligent coach, and he'll probably look at today's game and realise that, 80 possession we had at some points during the game. In that first half, we should be doing more than registering like 2 or 3 shots on goal. And one of them was like Rudiger from like the other side of Southampton, in terms of the shot that he took. So I think that, he's going to have to try and find a way to balance the need for structure to maybe protect the middle of the pitch, to maybe protect the back three, to sort of protect the goal a bit more, with a little bit more risk. And it could just be a simple thing of maybe trying to find a way to get, Havertz into the team, or Ziyech, or something like that. There's something I've toyed with is, if you want more energy, you could drop Mason deeper. You could give Havertz that false 9 role, something to experiment with to see if you can get him in the game. I feel that we lack a little bit of you could say, I don't know, whether it's sort of intelligence or guile. I know there was a guy who was talking about Cesc Fabregas, that kind of final third vision to play that pass. There were times today where if Cesc was in those positions, we probably would have scored 2 or 3 goals because he would have made the right decision, right weight of pass, everything would have been fantastic. So trying to get, I think you're right, trying to get a Ziyech or a Havertz on the pitch, as well as maybe trying to look at how we necessarily keep the structure. It's kind of why I'm hoping that we maybe move to a back 4 at some point, maybe take off one of the defenders, move to a back 4, maybe put another player in midfield. Yeah, get rid of wing back, play with a back 4, bring someone else into midfield, and then try and get a little few more men attacking and in better positions. But it's going to be interesting because this is a problem that's faced Sarri, it faced Lampard. Tuchel now has to deal with it as well. Do you think a little bit will be that the club need to address it in the summer in terms of the profile of players they sign? But for the rest of the season, for someone who's a very intelligent guy, I think that's going to be the interesting thing to see how Tuchel actually tries to solve this problem. He's got us looking solid, got us looking structured, but he'll see games like today as games that we potentially could have won. And then it's the question for him is then what is the next kind of evolution of this system to solve the problems that someone like Southampton will present?
Mm-hmm. Really well said. You literally read my mind with basically everything that you said, because I was going to talk about like switching to a back 4, and you covered that. So that's absolutely brilliant. I'm glad that we're on the same page. And we have a question from Abraham that kind of ties into this. It says, so about the formation, do you think that we're going to see a change versus Atletico? I do think that Atletico is going to be fine to sit back and just absorb our pressure. So I don't know, maybe in such a big game, we still see 3 at the back, or do you who do you think is going to be starting in that game? I really have no idea, because I'm so lost on what our best formation is, who should be playing. It's just completely up in the air right now. Do you have any ideas?
I would have said before today's game, I was fairly, I wouldn't say fairly confident. I would have had a relatively good idea, I think, on what sort of system we would have played. The way the game ended, I'm not so sure now, to be honest. I know Atletico are getting beat today, which is obviously good for us in terms of that. Well, it's probably not good because Oh,
you don't know. I was going to say
any team that gets beat then comes to us, or we're sort of like the rebound team. But I think it's going to be interesting because Atletico, they're not a team that want to be completely ball dominant. Simeone's style of play is pretty well known now in terms of how he's sort of got them playing. They'll probably try and, I'm not going to necessarily say they'll try and sit on the counter. They've obviously got an incredibly talented team. They're top of the league for a reason. So it's going to be interesting, I think, to see how we necessarily counter them. But I would be surprised if we change shape, just because I still think that it brings us a level of sort of solidity that we haven't seen. And certainly because I think it's the away leg is the first leg. Going there and getting a draw isn't the worst result in the world if you want to be a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more attack minded at home. So maybe the sort of the free back system that we've seen could be, again, that if you want the solidity, maybe you try and chuck Timo up top and maybe you try and, I don't know, push Cover into Cover and Kante and maybe Jorginho in there. Maybe it's a 5-3-2 rather than sort of the 3-4-2-1 or 3-4-1-2, whatever it is that we've seen. Could be a little bit of tweaks in terms of the kind of the forward line. I expect the back 5 probably stays, but maybe if you want, as I said, a bit more solidity, maybe you go Jorginho, Cover, and Kante as the 3, and maybe Mount plays as sort of just a floating player with Timo or whoever up top. I don't think, going there and being super ambitious is probably going to be quite a bad recipe to get absolutely demolished by them. They've beat better teams than us this season by just countering them and just playing them off the park. So I would go there and be a little bit, you have to respect their quality, and I think you have to respect that they're probably a better team than us at this point in time. So going there and being solid, and I said I wouldn't be mad going there and getting a draw and then trying to just come back to Stamford Bridge and win. So I would maybe go some sort of 5-3-2. It is pretty defensive, but as I said, kind of formation that we could also kind of nick a goal, and if they defend a little bit higher, Werner over the top, maybe Mason wins another penalty, maybe Timo wins another penalty that we've had so far. But for me, it's a question of going to Stamford Bridge with something to play for. That's what I'm looking for. So going to Stamford Bridge, even a 1-0 loss, you can still make an argument that that's not the worst result. But we don't want to go there and be 2-3-0 down that we have in previous games when we've sort of been at this stage. So that's hopefully what I'm trying to see. Come back for Stamford Bridge, something to play for, and then hopefully we can open up a little bit at Stamford Bridge.
But I was thinking about this, like obviously this is Chelsea's away fixture. So do you think that it may be more important to play a more offensive minded player so that we can get that away goal? Because then if they score against us at Stamford Bridge, it's basically done, no?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Yeah. I just don't have a lot of faith in us to defend when we've got loads of attackers on the pitch. I mean, part of me would like to go there and sit in a 4-3-3 and, play Kante, Mount, Havertz in midfield, play like Ziyech and Werner and someone else up top and just be like, okay, we're going for it this game. We'll probably get beat 4-0, but still like we went and had a go. I think, it's as negative as it sounds, and maybe I'm a little bit down on some of the players here, just probably because of the game we've just seen. But I think the key thing for me is not to let them score in their home fixture, quote unquote, and then try and sort of take advantage of that in the second leg when it's kind of our game as well. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. We definitely don't want to go into the game at Stamford Bridge in a Bayern Munich situation where I think we were already 3-0 down and there's no point in playing.
That's not the ideal.
So a couple of final things. So we know that Chelsea have really difficult fixtures coming up. They play Atletico Madrid, we play Manchester United, Liverpool, Everton, Leeds. How are you feeling about these games?
Oof, this is probably make or break time for the season, really. I mean, I say that, but the teams around us this year has been so weird in terms of teams slipping up when you don't expect them to, and teams winning when you don't expect them to. The only team that I genuinely think are good in the Premier League at the moment are Man City. I think they're a genuinely very good team. I think Liverpool without Van Dijk and maybe the Klopp has tried to change the style a little bit this season with bringing Thiago in. They're a little bit better when they're more workmanlike in midfield for me personally, and then having the guys up front, etc. They've obviously fallen away this season as well. I think the teams around us are not that much better than us. I think we're in the mix in terms of quality overall. But the next couple of fixtures, I think, if we can come out of this with a good percentage of points won, and we're still in top four or very much in touch with top four, I think we've got a good chance for the rest of the season. But this is a run of fixtures that, as I said, if we were to not do particularly well here, then I mean, you're looking at the rest of the season and just hoping then that everyone else starts, tripping up and whatever, wishing injuries and voodoo on players getting injured and stuff like that at other teams, which maybe is not the best way to look at things. But I think it's in our hands, I would say, at the moment in terms of the results. Obviously, we still play teams around us. We'll now question, I think, certainly the approach in some of these games, how we manage them, how we manage the squad, how we rotate as well. Because playing good teams back to back, you can't always rest your good players in these fixtures. You need to be able to grind through them. So. Yeah, I'm curious, I think, in terms of how we do. As I said, I'm still trying to be positive. I think if we come out of this with, like a high percentage of points won, that I think we're in a pretty good position for the rest of the season. But it will be, I think, a very testing time. And again, in terms of Tuchel's management, people will be putting the magnifying glass on him in these games and starting to make very, very, drastic comments about how good he is or how good he isn't. He's not really been here long enough, I think, for people to start making some very sweeping statements about him. But I think we will see certainly some of his sort of managerial talent should come out during these two games, and hopefully I think will help set us up in a way that we can at least, to say, come up with sort of a positive amount of points in terms of these games. So not absolutely 1,000,000% critical. We're not sort of at the kind of the nuclear situation at the moment, but positive results in these fixtures, particularly the teams we're playing, especially because they're around us, that little bit of distance between us and them, it's never a bad thing.
Yeah, really well said. And I just hope that we can get some results, because imagine a result against Manchester United would be absolutely massive to just take points off of them, give points to us, but it's going to be really difficult. I really don't know what formation we're going to play, which players are going to be started. It's going to be a lot of man management needed from Tuchel as well, but I just hope that he can learn from this game and figure out a solution, and I'm glad that I'm not the one who has to make that decision, and that's why he's the manager. And I just want to say thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Today I hit 3K subscribers, which is super cool. So thank you guys so much for your support. It honestly means a lot. If you like this video, please drop it a like because it helps out a lot, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Joe, you've been an absolutely fantastic guest. You've brought so much insight and tactical knowledge that I really appreciate, because I'm a bit of a nerd with that stuff. So I really, really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for coming on, and let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been enjoyable and actually pretty cathartic after what was, as you say, a game that felt a little bit like a loss. It's not as bad now. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter on Tweedie, and in terms of like podcasts and stuff like that, I'm normally on the London is Blue guys. So I've got my own podcast series coming out in the next month called The King's Road. And also I've got a weekly newsletter which drops every Monday on Patreon with London is Blue guys as well. That's typically where you can find me. And obviously, like, I'm literally dragged onto other shows as well. So you'll find me on YouTube elsewhere.
Amazing. Well, I made sure to put your Twitter handle in the description box. So guys, make sure to follow Joe. Really, really knowledgeable and nice guy. Thank you so much for watching this video. And until next time, I'm out.